start the recording, but yes, please, let's record.
Excellent. Since it's our meeting, I'll make the recording available afterwards through our external sharing system. Mike, welcome back, perhaps.
He's on mute right now. See if he.
Hey,
I think we're
Mike,
good.
you out there? You look like you might be on mute. I'd say let's go ahead and get started.
You got it right.
Mike knows a lot about this, so
Understood.
we'll get caught up.
You got it. So, in a nutshell, where NICE comes from, and again, where you're probably familiar with us, is really our heritage as a call recording company. But over time, we've expanded quite a bit into a number of other areas, as in particular the core contact center. And so, a lot of where our product direction comes from is around the notion of customer experience, and that certainly has changed over time as we've gone from plain vanilla inbound voice contact centers to a scenario where you're handling inbound emails, you're handling inbound chats from other scenarios, other places, and the agent's workload on the desktop has gotten increasingly complex as well. Mike, that was a good idea if that's you calling in over the phone.
I was able to join on my mobile.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. We're just getting started, so we'll go ahead, and we started recording as well, so we'll be able to make the recording available afterwards. So ultimately, and some of the things that we've discussed with Mike in terms of initial use cases are relative to the complexity around the idea of scheduling appointments with certain practitioners, where the agents are required to drive across multiple systems, or depending on which group of practitioners that the agent's interacting with, they've got to use one platform or another. And so ultimately, where we're coming from is helping the agents to drive as much value into these conversations as possible, and not necessarily focus on the desktop data processing activities, not necessarily focus on what they have to do to interact with the systems and platforms that they're using to do the work, but more focus on the conversation and understanding what the customer is calling about and what they can do to actually help and deliver to that customer on a day-to-day basis. So what we found is that Conifer is not really any different than many of your peers, in that because of the age of the organization and the way that platforms have evolved, you've got a number of different systems that the users are working with. And you want to find out in today's world, what is it that they're doing in those systems, make sure that their time is spent as productively as possible, and then ideally optimize what they're doing so that the training is minimized for new users and you're able to provide efficient services to your customers. So does this kind of hit and resonate with what you're expecting to talk about today? John or Ray, from the standpoint of automation and the ability to identify what the users are doing and provide analytics against that, is that kind of the key focus of what you wanted to see?
Yes, I believe that was the main topic that Mike and I had discussed. There was another piece that he talked about, a product you guys called, and maybe this is it, but is it Neva, or does that ring a bell?
Yep, that's what we're getting ready to introduce, so that's perfect.
Got it. Yep. Okay, perfect.
Okay, and so really what we find is that there's two slices of this, and what the market is coming at us with is a fair amount of buzzwords, really. And so we hear things like next best action, conversational agent guidance, real-time coaching, knowledge injection in real time, and so forth. And so this all comes together really with what would a usable interface look like for a user, where we can provide all those capabilities back to them. And so ultimately, where NICE got to on this is that we had capabilities already in existence on the workstation that were around the ability to pause recording and resume recording when PCI information was encountered, and the ability to identify certain customer information and tag that onto the call as two initial capabilities. So we developed a client that is able to work with users, track users as they do their job, and identify events that are significant from an analytics perspective, from a business knowledge standpoint, and then also from a coaching and guidance perspective. So a simple event that you might consider in this scenario would be the agent clicking answer on the contact center user agent, or someone in a shared services organization receiving a new unit of work in ServiceNow, or someone submitting a work order within particular ticketing, or a new user is onboarded in an HR standpoint. These sorts of business events are the things that are happening all day long throughout the enterprise. And so what NEVA is able to do, our nice employee virtual attendant here, is to inspect those events, see those events happening, and then offer assistance to the user as they go through them. Again, when it's focused in the contact center, a lot of times that's with coaching and guidance around what to say. But in that shared services in the HR scenario, it may well be what to do next instead. One of the things that Mike pointed out this morning to kind of focus around or to bring up as well is the ability to inject knowledge in real time. And so you see this fourth bullet on the right-hand side really describes that scenario where we're able to consider what knowledge exists in the environment. And in a clinical scenario like this, you've got a lot of phrases and a lot of scenarios that people are discussing with regards to procedures, with regards to illnesses, with regards to practitioners and their specialties that can be used to uniquely identify or to provide knowledge to agents about what those things are when customers bring them up. Because in some cases, the customers who have a particular condition are more familiar than the agent with the process or procedure, and it can be frustrating to the caller. So the more that we can provide the agent with that knowledge in real time, the better they're able to provide your customers with empathetic service and knowledgeable service as they go throughout the day. So we'll get into, as we get into the demonstration, how that comes into fruition. Where we started the conversation with Mike was just there at the automation portion. So thinking about, at the moment where a contact center agent answers a phone call, how could we help them to satisfy the customer's need or intent as quickly as possible and recover the time, right, to get off the phone effectively and be able to service the next customer that's waiting. As the conversation evolved, and in particular on the last discussion that we had, Mike informed us and brought up really a discussion around data collection and the idea of this body of data that exists within Conifer and that would be generated again by agent behaviors at the workstation. So while on the one hand, we're presenting the agent with knowledge and with guidance, on the other hand, we're collecting data about their activities and how we can use that to better manage those users and also to better staff. From Mike's standpoint, his interest is in workforce management and making sure we have the right folks in the right place, but also making sure that we have the right people doing the right things and understanding that they're as productive as they can be during that time. So I wanted to understand a little bit, if I could, around what KPIs are you most interested in managing towards? I can over-rotate sometimes towards the contact center and towards handle time there. I think you have an interest across more broadly the organization. And so I wonder, is it about human reduction in overall time across the board, or are there other quality-related KPIs that you're concerned with? Is it units of work completed? Is it first-time completions?
I'm afraid to talk because I'm afraid something will go wrong, but you're onto something. And I think that there's different areas of Conifer that are looking at different KPIs. Mm-hmm. The standard KPIs, of course, are standard, but there is that first call resolution. There is that compliance. There is the things that need to be said. There's making sure that the patient gets the right information that they're getting and that information was recapped. And that can vary across different lines of business on what's being required. And then, of course, the agents' quality, what they're doing about quality in the conversations with the patient and what they're doing within the desktop or in the solution that they're working in, the application they're working in, ensure that they're doing their data entry and data and system updates correctly.
Yep, got it. And really what this starts to speak to is a feedback loop, we think, in that when you consider the overall work performed by the user, the conversation they had with the caller, the amount of time that that overall took for the caller out of their day, let's say, to complete that transaction, and the quality rating that you got back from it, we want to help you create that feedback loop so that when you see a negative outcome, that you're able to identify what happened and mitigate that from hopefully happening in the future. And then secondarily, when you see a positive outcome, we're able to amplify and reinforce that so that the next time we're potentially recommending, say, this or that back instead, because we know that the last time this helped, right? And ultimately, that's where NICE is at a much bigger picture, is the ability to take historical speech and understand those conversations through an AI model. In this case, we've started at a smaller picture, which is to look at the agent's behavior at the workstation. But exactly to your point, we want to find the reproducible things that they're doing, automate those things which are automatable, and provide guidance and reinforcement around the behaviors that are providing good outcomes for your callers. So this slide really speaks to exactly what happened here at Conifer, in that we started out to have discussions around where can we potentially automate some of these things. And of course, you have low-hanging fruit there. But ultimately, the step back occurred, and you said we really need to understand what's happening first before we can dive into automation. And so this is where you see this slide, which is where many customers go and have gone, around looking first where users are spending their time. And so this pink area here on the left, which is what we call desktop application analytics, is going to be a, let's say, first step of reporting, which would provide information around how much time a user spends within a given application. So as a NICE employee, I spend my time in Outlook, I spend my time in Salesforce, I spend my time in LinkedIn and other applications like that. And so a report on me would show, ideally, that of an 8-hour day, I'm spending, I don't know, maybe 6 of it in Salesforce or in Teams, right? Presenting meetings like this. And Paul, my manager, would be able to view a report and see how much of my time I'm spending in those particular applications. In your case, what we would do is put a report together that says, here are the applications which a Conifer agent in this particular line of business should be using. And there are gray areas, right? I may use YouTube as a way to learn or view NICE content on YouTube that we've published. And that's valuable business time or training time, which is kind of grayish. I might also be there viewing music videos, right, which is quite unproductive. And so we would there's kind of gray areas there as well. But ultimately, you're beginning to see who are the folks that are spending time within the places that I expect, who are the folks that are off in Never Never Land buying things on Amazon and surfing on eBay and that sort of thing. So you get to start to see the productiveness of these users who are now working from home and recover that, and hopefully start to guide people towards more productive activities. So an honest day's pay for an honest day's work is really phase one, especially in this work from home environment. Does that make sense as an initial starting step? And is that a report or a set of reports which would produce value? And could you manage users towards that?
I'm nodding my head, waiting for somebody else to respond. Yes, I believe so.
There's unfortunately 3 other folks on mute, but hopefully that would resonate. And we'll get into a little bit more depth at this point. So from that standpoint, Paul, knowing that I spend a certain amount of time in Salesforce, or you knowing your agents spend a certain amount of time within a scheduling application, doesn't necessarily let you know how many times they scheduled an appointment on behalf of a customer, or how many times they processed a claim within your claims application, or how many cases someone solved within your case application, because you need additional data around the process itself. And so this is where what we would call desktop process analytics comes into play, in the sense that we can start to look at the process at large, which may span multiple applications. In that, if my workflow is to answer a call on my contact center user agent, and then I look a customer up inside the CRM application, and then I verify their policy inside of a green screen, and then I go and schedule them for the actual appointment within another third-party web application or a thick client. And so the the application that's measuring that needs to understand, how does that process work? What does the repetitive behavior look like that a user goes through when they are processing a claim, or they are scheduling a meeting, or excuse me, an appointment with a practitioner on behalf of the caller? And so that is where the higher level process analytics comes into play. And at this
Quentin,
point, yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify that not only can the process analytics through cognitive ability monitor a process, but it can actually span multiple departments that encompasses a process.
Yes, that's a great point, because when you think about a new customer onboarding with a policy, they may immediately begin to have claims against it, or immediately begin to schedule services against the policy. And so the process actually began with their need for the service, which led to the demand for the policy, which covered the service. And ultimately, that would span multiple departments, as you can imagine, or even something as simple as a pre-authorization for a claim, where I need to go to the billing department and obtain the pre-authorization, and then potentially go to member services to actually schedule the appointment that I've gone for the pre-auth for. And so you'd want to see that holistically and understand, how did each unit's involvement with that end up with overall quality and overall satisfaction from the customer side. Really, what we and I view as digital transformation in that sense is turning this into a data-driven thing. And where we're coming from, I think, is that in the contact center world, this was already the case, in that from the point at which a contact center user logs in, we know exactly how many calls that they've taken. We know exactly how long that they spent on each call. We know pretty much how long they spent on after call work, and we've accounted for virtually every minute of their day during their shift. But we found in many cases in the back office and in shared services, the user comes in the morning and they clock in, and then they leave at 5 o'clock, and we don't necessarily know what got accomplished there. It's not as data driven, certainly, as the contact center was. So we can provide that same sort of management capability that feeds into workforce management and those other groups, that feeds into being able to provide reporting and analytics around the behaviors that are outside the contact center. So this leads to a set of reports that would potentially allow you to stack rank employees against each other in terms of how many claims do you process in an 8-hour shift? How long do you spend on average to process a claim of similar complexity? How long do you take on average to schedule an appointment during that phase of your call over and against your peers in a work group, or to Danny's point, similar work groups, and start to use these from a management standpoint. But from an analytics overall perspective, one of the important concepts here is that the data is as good as the report, but it is up to you to manage the user behaviors to tune what's coming out of the report in that sense, right? If I find that I'm only getting 70% productivity because my users are spending 30% of their time on Facebook, if I do nothing about that, I don't actually achieve any benefit from having viewed the report. Does that make sense?
It does. We have the
Absolutely.
we have Variant right now in our back office in the GBC, and it provides some of that data for our back office agents that don't ever get on the phones.
So when we get into reporting conversations, and the reason I ask that question is because in many cases, a very relevant question is, who is the consumer of the report? And if it's the business trying to find ways to reduce headcount or understand where the human effort is being spent, that's one thing, over and against maybe a line of business manager or a contact center unit supervisor who's trying to manage the overall performance of their employees over and against each other, and that sort of thing. So we want to, as we step into this, understand who are those consumers and what is the value of the data that they would get, what action would they take from it. And obviously, the conversations that we've had to this point included Microsoft Power BI. So what we would want to do is make sure that the data that we're collecting from the workstation is relevant and in a format that makes sense, so that the reports that you generate are actionable by the folks that would be consuming them.
Sorry.
So to this point, using a single client from a single platform, we're able to collect all of this data and present it in whichever way makes sense to you, as typically in this case, a business manager. the center column there around optimization starts to look at this same data, but from a slightly different lens. And there are a few different aspects of it. One is just simply documenting what's happening. And so I've I've sarcastically in the past made comments about if I asked, could you produce documents that are your processes? What should the user actually do if they sat down and I called up and wanted to schedule a particular procedure, or find out if a particular thing was covered, or find out what my out of pocket would be around a particular thing? Is there a process that the user could go through? And so in some cases, the answer is yes, and they produce a 3-inch thick binder and that's it. And in some cases, it's no, and it's kind of freeform. So the one aspect of the automation discovery, what we're now calling NEVA Discover, is the ability to start to discover and document those processes as they exist, and to start to consider the return around what would happen if we automate it. In many cases, the information we have today is anecdotal. And to that point, again, if I can show a report that I spent 8 hours in Salesforce today, that doesn't necessarily mean I actually did anything. I could have simply had my browser open. And so the question is, what did I do within those, and how is that actionable and important? So the data that we get here starts to become what is the user actually doing versus what are they supposed to be doing, and what is being repeated across multiple groups. So now we can think about where is the business value in automating that activity, and instead of just producing reports around how often it happens, we can start to drive the human effort out of it. And this center column here starts to really put quantifiable data around how many times did it get done today, how many people actually were involved in this process, all of the different applications that were touched. So whereas that may be a black hole or we don't necessarily know, now we can start to quantify how long they spent in each of these applications, what were the steps across it, and ultimately, when you think about it, it's adherence. If that 3-inch binder exists and the users are prescribed to do it this way, what percentage of the time did they actually do it the way that we told them to, which becomes also actionable and valuable. In some cases, the users found a better way to do it, right, than the way we told them. And so if we could identify that and make that the new prescription, then we can learn, and that's valuable in its own way. So I've spent quite a bit of time on that one slide, forgive me, but it's a fairly large bulk of information that comes out. The ultimate point of it is that from a single client, a single platform, we can provide you all of these different slices of analytics. It's really a matter of who's the consumer of the report and what would be the intent of understanding the data. So hopefully this puts some context around what we're about to see. So I've pretty much spoken through this slide. A couple of single platform, and ultimately the logic layer is the key. So that when you look at how you bring analytics and bring automation into the Conifer environment, from a single environment, you can manage down to the user level what's happening down there. From a single set of logic, you can decide based on these events occurring across the enterprise, regardless of whether they're in the contact center or elsewhere, how are we going to react and what do we do about it? And who needs to know about it ultimately? And so this starts to go into the analytics a little bit more, and really starts to talk about the differences in what we want to know about the user and kind of what's valuable. These same sorts of things become events that we can use to guide the agents. And so as they traverse from one application to the other, instead of just knowing about it, we can take action, we can provide them guidance, we can be providing them with whatever it is that they need, while meanwhile we're reporting on the back end about what they did.
Some of the data that you're capturing, I'm just kind of curious, Quinn, some of the data you're capturing, is that shareable with the agent through Max?
Yes. It just depends on what you want to show. And it brings up an interesting question in that what we find initially, when you look back at this stack here, is that in many cases, there is a benefit of not having the user know that they're being monitored. So you get a more high fidelity view of what's happening. In other cases, there may be benefits of letting them know that they're being monitored, because then you can expect that they're going to be more likely to toe the line, so to speak, and do the things that you want. But initially, we find that a first pass is oftentimes without the users necessarily being aware of it. But it's ultimately up to you to decide what's exposed. Go ahead, Danny.
Sorry, I'm sorry, was it Mike? Was it you who asked the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell me if I understand the reason you asked. Is it so that the agent can have real-time guidance through a process?
No, I understand that this is going to, that this solution will provide the real-time guidance. One of the things that there's been under discussion is really making metrics and making KPIs and making data available so the agents know where they are at any point in time in their performance, in their KPIs.
Okay. So almost all right. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was talking over you.
No. I talked over you. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike. If you're not, please.
No, there's some interesting legislation I think came out of New York about that. Businesses are starting to watch around agents or employees being notified when they are being monitored and how they're being monitored. And so we're just kind of curious.
Okay. So what you're looking potentially at would be the monitoring of the data, and then that data being presented to the agent in almost a KPI dashboard type, hey, here's how you're doing against this KPI kind of thing.
Right, and and merge that kind of solutions into things like gamification. Merge that into some of the other opportunities that we have to let the agent see how they're doing and understand what the business looks like and how they're contributing to it. I think I'm just more looking for like transparency, more future plans.
Yep.
So this goes back to Quentin's original answer, Mike, is that any data that is collected can be sliced, diced, processed, and presented in any way that you want to any user group, including the agents themselves.
Yep. And it really is all about the presentation, right? I said it like this thing. And by that, I mean, it's easy to show a user a dry report that has no color and it's just a bunch of columns in a tabular format. And that will generate one level of excitement within your user base. The second way is to present it to your point, a gamified way, where we're potentially stack ranking them in a way that provides positive competitiveness, right? And potentially rewards associated with meeting your KPIs. And so while we don't have tons of content on that today, we can certainly dive into it in future sessions around how you want to present that back to the user. But we certainly can discuss that. And we have our nice performance management suite, which is a key component of that. So the question, and this, I think I do have a slide that dives into this a little bit. Let me just see here. Yes, indeed. So what we kind of show through this slide here is that scenario where you've got a bunch of different data sources potentially providing data into the environment, of which Nice Desktop Analytics, which is the slice that we're discussing here through the employee virtual attendant and so forth, is providing data into what would potentially be a nice data warehouse here. We provide one layer of reporting through this and then add value through that sort of coaching implementation where we've got feedback relative to your performance equals you should be coached on A, B, C, or D, and potentially you should receive training on A, B, C, or D because you're apparently deficient there. Oh, forgive me, we're having apparently a tornado warning in effect. And so in that case then, and down to the gamification, right? Do we want to actually include things like trivia around our processes that are games that the users can play to earn points? And again, KPI-based reaching and all that sort of thing. So this whole area could be dived into in another whole session by itself. But it's really, again, how do we take action on this data which has been compiled from the users? So slice A is let's get the data, slice B is let's act on it. And then slice C would be over on the right where we push it again forward into Power BI and you take further action on it to the extent that it's even more relevant across a broader subset of the business, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. And Ray did ping me. Unfortunately, Ray had to drop, but he's going to catch up with me after this.
Mm-hmm. And we'll have the recording as well, so that'll be able for him to review too. So, this is again one slice of it, right? Where we're talking about analytics. At this point, the user hasn't even necessarily seen a user interface, or to your point, they may or may not know anything is being collected depending on what our HR policy is and what we decide to present to them. And then we may or may not present data back to them to help their own performance. But ultimately, where NEVA really comes into play, where the employee virtual attendant really starts to step in, is taking that data and presenting user interface back to the user in real time. So based on that user clicking answer on a phone call in the contact center, or based on the user reaching or receiving an email in that shared services organization, we may then present them a user interface that says, hey, that email has an attachment, which is an application for a new policy, or supporting documentation relative to a policy that's been applied for, or supporting documentation that's relative to a procedure that they've requested a pre-auth on, right? It's going to be arbitrary. And so we're able to present a user interface which helps the user intelligently deal with that content in the most efficient way possible. From the standpoint of the contact center, that's going to be ideally starting with the prompting for, thanks for calling Conifer. Who am I speaking with, and the authentication phase of the call, and stepping on into the statement of intent. It's really up to you where you would want this to jump in. One of the key values can be the presentation of data to the user as they answer the call. So when you look at this center box here, you have the ability to see whatever information you want to see about the caller, which could be policy related information, it could be upcoming appointments, it could be anything that you need to know about the caller, and specifically based on the intent, or specifically based on whatever the content of that email was. So if we can identify who the sender was and we can tell that they're a policyholder, if we can identify the caller and tell that they're a policyholder, then we can start to provide guidance towards the agent and give them the ability to start to handle that transaction. If I press 3 to schedule an appointment, then we can start the agent out with the schedule an appointment wizard, and they don't have to navigate through 3 or 4 applications to get to that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that front end is also really high on my radar as well.
Right.
When that patient calls in with the AI opportunities and some of the other functionality that I'm investigating to be able to even automate as much of that as possible.
Correct. And this is kind of where, when your email came in today, it expanded the scope of our discussion a little bit. But if you look at this right-hand panel here, where we talk about empathy, and on the lower right-hand corner there, we talk about speech velocity and empathy, and whether they're interrupting the caller and all this, it really starts to go to that point where, up to and including real-time speech analytics. So right. In one world, we can do post-call analytics, where we take the recording and we analyze it and we provide guidance around what they might do better next time. In this case, we can be now listening to the call in real time and potentially providing guidance around what they could be doing right now. And it really just depends on how much information you want to start to provide to the agent in real time, and what would be the best interface in which to do so.
Or who the best agent to do this would be, if we're just history on it.
It's true. And that is, yeah, I mean, it speaks to a different part of it in the sense that that's almost at the routing level, right? Before the call even got to the agent, we're making AI-based decisions around who should handle this. And that is a different slice, but yes, absolutely. And then once the call does get to the best agent, we're here saying you should do this or that based on what the caller is telling you and what you're doing on the workstation, the outcome of the things that you put into different applications, and providing guidance around that. So ultimately, the flexibility is, do you need a little sliver like this that provides a couple of quick shortcuts and takes up a little corner of the screen? Do you need something that's a 25% of a screen thing that provides just a little bit of information and perhaps, a couple of inputs that gets them to the next step of a wizard? Or would more of a full screen interface be the thing that you can do? In your case, because you're a CX1 user, you have the browser-based interface of CX1 that you can extend, to your earlier question, to potentially show the output of the analytics and reporting to show them how they're performing relative to KPIs, but also you could be presenting other guidance, other knowledge, and so forth. And so you look at an interface that's something like this, where potentially you're providing a panel that has some information about the caller and the policies and whatever other appointments that they have in pre-auths that are relevant to the call at hand. You're potentially providing guidance towards the agent around what to say or do next. You're potentially providing help in the form of a chatbot or knowledge or whatever else is contextually relevant. And so ultimately what Neva offers you is the ability to go from a starting point of this with a tactical, let's finish after call work, let's help with post-call notes, let's help to make the scheduling process go quicker. And then as you create modular building blocks of functionality, you eventually step up to a point where you're looking at a more holistic view of what is the agent getting, what do they have to interact with, and can we create a unified interface that covers all of these things?
Yeah. You have a unified desktop.
To a large extent, yeah. I mean, it really depends on to what extent does the agent have to navigate back and forth between multiple applications, and how big would they need to be? How efficient are they at real estate? Would we make this 2/3 of a screen and maybe their other application is 1/3 of a screen, but that gets the job done, right? We're sort of almost architecting the agent experience on the workstation.
Yep, I'm with you.
And by the way, Mike, we have a lot of experience with this in terms of the rollout of solutions like this. So we would have helped establish a center of excellence, and you would likely have beta testers that could say, okay, there's version 1, 2, and 3 of this, and each one of different levels of presentation and complexity and so forth, and get that, before you do any kind of a rollout, have beta testers and communication and user feedback, and it's a really great experience.
Yep.
So this is a second view that gives you kind of an idea of where we might expose search results. So in this case, let's say we recognize the customer had said albuterol, or in this previous screenshot you saw, there's in text chat, they say, I'm trying to get my prescription for albuterol refilled. So Neva makes a correlation between that and starts to expose search results around albuterol. The interesting thing, and just as we get into the topic of knowledge, since you brought it up in your email today, the knowledge as an aspect of this transaction is multifaceted, in that there's knowledge around, is albuterol covered by my policy? There's knowledge around what albuterol is. There's knowledge around, is it potentially interacting with other drugs that I'm taking? There's knowledge around, how do I get a prescription refilled, right? There's so many facets of this. And so we can bring that together in a way that makes sense based on the context of the call and kind of where you're at in that transaction, right? And where the agent is on different applications. So that's kind of the beauty of being on the desktop side of things, is that we can see where they are, not just within this interface, but within, your scheduling apps and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So we can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Didn't mean to interrupt you, but as far as within the knowledge base, one of the components of the knowledge base and the intelligence that you have built into this desktop is our knowledge base that our agents use. They call it eGuides, but it's Microsoft OneNote based.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to get that a little bit more user friendly, more intuitive is also on the radar.
It's an interesting thing, but this seems to be the next big migration, is that we're finding customers had way more spreadsheets and other things behind the scenes than they let on. And now it's, can we turn that into a quote unquote dashboard, to an interface where they're not browsing through a workbook with 50 tabs or a OneNote with infinite tabs and pages trying to find the thing. And there's really no effective search that overrides the whole thing at an enterprise level, right? You don't want to expose that to the internet for Google, but internally you need an engine that's going to say, here is ultimately the knowledge that's relevant to what you're doing right now.
Right.
So there is an aspect of that, and it goes outside of Neva. It's called CX1 Expert. And basically it's a knowledge management system that we can provide you more information on. Neva is smart enough to search across multiple sources. So you may have SharePoint already. In fact, I would almost bet on it. And you have these OneNotes and some other sources, I'm sure, that are available. Neva could arguably go and get from those as well. So Expert would provide you with a single consolidated source of knowledge that easily would be gotten to and has some other benefits as well. So to the extent that knowledge management is a part of this, we're happy to address that too.
And that could be implemented into a CRM system. That could be implemented into this agent that we're just talking about. It could be an HTML site for you as well. So we see a lot of people do that where the agent will go on and type in the question and it automatically pulls from all multiple sources, and it pulls it all together. So.
Right. I'm with you. Thank you.
So that can be exposed, as mentioned, as a list of results. It could be a single result if that's relevant. One of the other examples we did just for another customer the other day was around a LASIK call. And so to the same point, there is getting ready for your first LASIK, right? Is kind of, here's what you should do to prepare. Here's the kind of things you need to know afterwards. Communicating that to the caller is an important aspect of it. So can we expose a button here, of course, to email or send SMS links to particular articles of knowledge to your customers so that they can get at them as well. In that case, it was about what would my out-of-pocket be relative to the procedure based on my coverage and policies, and then how would I go about scheduling it, right? So again, there's multiple bodies of knowledge. So we can expose buttons in line here that would be a click to link through an article, or, it just depends on the context what the best way is to expose that to the agent in real time. You don't want to overwhelm them. I'll say that because we've looked at scenarios where like the whole transcript of the call's flying by here, and that just doesn't get the job done. What you really want to do is pick out, and obviously we're helping the agent as well by saying you should say this to the caller. So you want to keep that kind of minimized, and there's only so much you can pop up at once.
Right.
So I kind of got to rambling. I had a couple of demos set up. I'm going to do one in particular, if that's all right. Around just kind of that scheduling call. I think you might have seen this one, Mike, but it'll get it into the recording if nothing else. And that way the folks that were here will be able to see it. So this kind of starts off, and again, this would come in from a call answer scenario. So we have the ability to verify the caller. And from an analytics standpoint, one of the first places where our customers have started to look at what I'll call intra-call analytics is around how long or what percentage of the actual call time do we spend authenticating the caller themselves and making sure that they are who they say they are versus handling the thing that they wanted us to help with. So in many cases, just presenting the vitals to the caller, or forgive me, to the agent who answered the call, and saying, here's what you should expect this person's patient ID to be and their date of birth if you ask them, and their email address or home phone or whatever the identifying information is. And that way you're not exposing entire customer records and tons of PHI to agents. We hopefully want to expose the minimal amount of PHI to the agent as possible to help them get through the call with the caller. So we start out with an authentication phase. We can provide you with analytics on how long it took to get through this portion of it, so you can start to look at those call segmentations. And then we can, again, reach into potentially your back ends. And so we would weight their PCP, their primary care practitioner, obviously first. But if there were other specialists, or in this case, we're going for a specialist, so it's probably not their PCP, we can pick out whatever ones would be most appropriate and pick out whatever most relevant appointments there are and present that to the agent in a dialogue that's going to be most relevant to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see kind of the power of being able to do a survey-based dialogue as well. And this can be used for a variety of purposes, right? Depending on the answers, we can take the agent through a nonlinear path of if-then statements and so forth to get them to do an appropriate interview. In some of our other customers, we've also heard feedback around when the customer calls in and says, I need to schedule an appointment because I have symptom X, or I feel like I want to see practitioner X. Kind of taking an inexperienced agent through that dialogue of what is your real symptom, what is the actual thing that needs to be seen, that you need to be seen for, and how urgent really is it, is another similar dialogue like this that we've been putting together. So that can be powerful to help new agents get through, let's say, less frequently seen symptoms or conditions that they're not used to seeing, as opposed to the basic, I've got a runny nose and a fever. So in this case, they can go through the dialogue, and if you look in the upper right-hand corner, what you're going to start to see is that we're automatically taking notes around this behavior. So now We've got that the agent verified the patient's name and date of birth. The patient reported a positive response, which we got twice because we've got a separate here for a COVID response, which we could push separately into a different application. And then you can see here that we prompted out. And I think personally that this is really important because what we found with a lot of our customers is that they hand the agent a piece of paper and it says, here's the fill in the blanks with what came out of your scheduling system. Whereas in this case, we're able to build up these dynamic dialogues that we can read out exactly what to say with the exact stuff. And that way the agent's much less likely to make a mistake than they are if they're trying to fill in the blanks against something else. It can be really important when you're looking at billing inquiries and so forth. So, you know, the ability to provide these dialogues in real time can be a great value when it comes to helping patients be at appointments that they're supposed to be at and that sort of thing.
The one you sent me has been shared around a little bit.
Excellent. So the other thing that we found in looking at calls with some of your peers is twofold. One is that they would literally say the words along the lines of, you have the opportunity to write down this information. Do you have a pen and paper handy? Let me give you the opportunity to write down this long blurb about what you have to do to be prepared for your appointment. And we said, wouldn't it make sense if you could just click a button and email or SMS that out to the person instead? Because it really isn't an opportunity for me to write down potentially inaccurately the information you're going to give me. And I may or may not have a pen handy in the first place. So for us, you know, it's little things like that that can be such a value because the agent's potentially trying to manually craft an email or just the communication never happens. So that was one, was like, do you have a pen and paper handy? We literally were searching through their recordings and finding that over and over again. And then the second was long pauses of silence, where it was in many cases either we're looking up, how much is this thing going to cost you? And so that was a big, long lookup that had minutes sometimes of just silent gaps while the agent's clicking away on their keyboard. So, you know, we can look through and find some of those areas of opportunity as well in other ways besides just Automation Finder.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of an aside, but on another project that we're doing with another platform, Michael Sullivan knows more about it than I do. But there's one of the things that they're doing is catching consent. You know, do we have value? And part of that process, it's really bizarre, we're doing it through Contact, is, you know, sending those calls off to a quick script that records the patient saying yes, basically. And I can see that being automated in here where we're capturing the consent to send that SMS or that email in this contact record, easily attainable without a lot of pain and suffering for the agent or that patient.
Yes. And it's little enhancements like that that can make a big difference. Patrick, you came off mute, so if you want to say something, please do.
I was just going to say, Mike, I think that's a great use case.
Yep. Little enhancements like that can make such a big difference. And when you look at how many times those things happen in the course of a day, that's where a lot of the handle time goes. And so when we can hit those low-hanging fruit, as I said, build modular building blocks out of that, right? The ability to send out an SMS or to send out an email from a template. And then we just look for as many places as we can inject that into the workflow as possible, as quickly as possible, and just keep building up from that until eventually you have knocked out the vast majority of your use cases through a single interface there.
You know, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, I can almost envision it working, but you know, in this industry, you're dealing with a lot of, you know, people, elderly people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really older technologies. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't even turn this into like a broadcast message. You know, in hours, so they'd have a voice note they could hear.
Yes.
Opportunities.
We've spent a lot of time on the clinical aspects of it, but certainly there is the sales aspect of this as well, right? From the standpoint that there are times when I would approach you and end up as a lead. And so there's a life cycle associated with that from the point at which you identify me to the point at which you've sold me the thing that you want to sell me. And certainly helping with that is a big part of where Neva can be. And CX1, ultimately, if you haven't explored that, there is the notion of routing work items, right? And so we can take an arbitrary anything and route it to a human immediately using CX1 and have Neva help them immediately when it arrives there. And so that can be follow up with this lead. It could be make sure that this person attends the appointment that they're going to be doing and so forth. But to your very point, I'll say if we're telling the agent what to say here, there's no reason why I can't use text to speech to read that to the caller, right? And that's where you get into this IVR, AI-based IVR, and handling many of these use cases as a digital transaction, hopefully avoiding the human involvement at all.
I'm absolutely with you. I know that everybody's kind of coming up at the top of the hour. I wanted to maybe you like maybe touch base. Let's see, I have a call here at 1 o'clock, and it could be next week if we need to. Just a few 15-minute calls where the strategy is kind of being a strategy is developing. That kind of got accelerated a little bit with some of the conversations that I've been in this week. That I just want to make sure that I'm ahead of. And
okay.
It is that this is an important part of it. The desktop automation is an important part of it, and like I mentioned earlier, the AI and the whole nine. I mean, it's a cradle to grave solution. Customer journey, or patient journey, customer journey. Cradle to grave. Integration with other vendors for information about that patient the moment they call in. New start partners, where I'm able to query UStar at the point of the call and get information about that telephone number that's coming in and emails associated with it, addresses, demographics. So it's looking to paint a very broad picture and then start figuring out where the value comes in, where the most value can be gained, and start putting that puzzle together.
Yep.
So that's what I'm trying to work on, and I'm trying to get this, into the 2023 mindset of our leadership.
Well, we're definitely interested to help put a program together around that, and we're happy to provide whatever other information we can relative to the product and certainly the methodologies and resource expectations and so forth, right? And kind of what we've seen other folks do as they move into and down this path.
Right. Perfect. Well, I
And
wish
in fact,
we had time for demos. I know this one. I wanted Michael Sullivan to be able to see your back in the back. That I don't know if you can get to it very quickly, but the low code, no code solution that you use to build this thing. I mean, you put this thing together very quickly for us. I mean, I think I had it like the day after we talked.
Yep. We can certainly put together another session. I don't know if I'll have time to get into it here. Let me see if I can just get a couple of screens on.
We can do it.
Okay.
It was very, very intuitive.
Yep. In a nutshell here, we'll take a second since we have time. Basically, you're just able to, so there's two key elements here. One would be the notion of a workflow. And so within a workflow, I can create multiple arbitrary steps and decision points as well. So I just simply drag and connect these together in a way that makes sense based on the workload that I have. And then with each of these, I'm able to drag steps into it as well. So I mentioned we have all these.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're spot on. I'm just from him seeing what you just showed us. I know him very well. He totally gets this. I'm not sure if he's off mute or not. Nope. But I just wanted him to get a glance on that because I knew that would trigger him.
Yep.
And Mike, just so you know, this diagram that Quentin quickly built would be an example of the wireframe that can automatically be discovered by that same NEVA client and imported right into here as a straw man of a automation.
Yep. And then from the user interface perspective, also drag and drop, right? So I can drag text areas inputs, all my different bits of functionality here to build out the user interface, from whatever scenario I want. So that can be done as well.
Perfect.
So we'll certainly take you more into that in a future session, show you how to do automations, look for event handlers, connect to applications on the workstation, all kinds of goodness.
I mean, there's a vision that is forming, and I just want I wasn't expecting the opportunity to get it in front of the leaders this soon. And it's still at a high level. They just happen to have one of those executive golf course kind of things that happen, I guess. And so we got some movement. And I just wanted to make sure that they had all the information. We get all the information in front of them as soon as possible.
Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to speak with them. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Well, we're all about native to platform first, where that's feasible.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Good strategy.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I just appreciate your time. And we can maybe Quentin or Aaron or Daniel, we can connect sometime next week and try to start seeing what the next step is. I don't want you to have to just be over and over doing demos after demos and demos. That's not my goal. But I'm just trying to get a picture painted and then start. And please understand, there's like two major projects going on, and the people that I think that would get the most value out of this we're in a pretty significant project with a very tight timeline. It's really hard to get in front of some of those leaders right now, but I know that there's interest.
No,
Good stuff.
we love it. Do you want to? Is there a certain day that's better for us to schedule for next week that we want to recap?
Calendar real quick. Day after a holiday is horrible.
Yep.
Right.
First is wide open for me though.
Well, the first is but we have a no meeting day on Thursday the 31st. I've got pretty much can do almost anything during that day.
Tuesday the 31st, you mean?
I'm sorry, June 2nd is a no meeting day.
Okay.
I'm having trouble switching between calendars.
I'm good anytime after 11 a.m. Eastern.
Looks like I'm looking at everybody. I'm looking at Daniel's and obviously Quentin calendar right now. 1 o'clock Eastern. Okay, I'm sorry.
If that works, just pick a time. I mean, I can literally almost make any time work. And just a quick conversation, and I'll hopefully have a little bit more of my strategy outlined when I have a 3-day weekend to actually think about and document some of the things I'm trying to get documented.
Okay.
Got it.
So we'll just on the 2nd, you said though, right?
On June 2nd, yep. No day meeting.
Okay. So I'll send an invite over for the at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So
perfect.
Okay. Awesome.
All right, gentlemen. Great long weekend. I really appreciate your time today. I'm sorry we lost some people, but the recording will be really handy to have.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.